Now we have the preliminary information about media playback. We need to start with some hands-on work. The starter code compiles and runs already. Let's take a look at what it does in some detail. Basically, we already have a classical music quiz application. We have a portrait of the composer loaded into the top half of the screen, and 4 options of composer names in the bottom half of the screen. Our aim is to replace the image in the top half of the screen with a music player that plays a piece by one of the 4 composers in the bottom half, so that the user has to listen to the piece and try and guess who composed it. Over in the source code, we have 4 Java files: main activity, quiz utils, and sample. The main activity serves as the first UI screen, allowing the user to start a new game and to see their high score. It is also shown when the game is completed, but in that case, it also displays the user's current score. The quiz activity is the screen that contains each question. This is where the media playback will eventually occur. It uses the quiz utils class for all quiz-related needs, such as generating a question, checking the answer, etc. Finally, we have the sample class. This is a POJO, plain old Java object, that represents a single piece of playable media. It contains the following fields: an integer ID, a composer, the title of the sample, the URI for the media file, and a string with the ID for the composer image drawable. The rest of the class is just getter and setter methods, as well as some static methods for manipulating the samples. Notably, we have read JSON file, read entry, get all sample IDs, get sample by ID, and get composer art by sample ID. To understand how these work, take a look at the last file of interest, the media.exolist.json file. This file defines the organization of our media samples. It contains a JSON array of samples with the same fields as our sample.java class. If you're unfamiliar with JSON, take a look at the link in the instructor's notes to get a refresher. Note that there are other ways to store media in Android based on your use case. Check out Media Store if you need to make your media files available to other apps. The read JSON file method of the sample class opens up this JSON file and returns a JSON reader object pointing to the array of samples. It is used in conjunction with the read entry method, which reads a single JSON object in the array and returns a sample object with the fields filled from the JSON object file. The rest of the methods, get all sample IDs, get sample by ID, and get composer art by sample ID, use these read methods to get all sample IDs, get a single sample object by ID, and get the correct composer portrait bitmap by ID, respectively. The quiz then works as follows. We check if it's a new game, and if it is, we generate a list of all sample IDs to use for questions. We also set the current score to 0. If it's not a new game, then we get the list of remaining songs from the intent that started the activity. Next, we use the quiz utils class to generate a question and obtain the correct answer from that question. We can then use the sample class methods to obtain sample objects from the IDs and then populate the buttons with the composer names. In this method, we also set the on-click listeners to the buttons. We then record the user's response and check if it's correct. We then remove the answer from the list of remaining sample IDs so that the same question cannot be asked again. We then set up an intent to start the question activity again, putting in the remaining songs as an intent extra. Once there's only one remaining ID left, we end the game and display the current and high scores. Cool. Let's add the music player.